What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back for another showdown breakdown for tonight's Thursday night football battle between the Washington Redskins and the Minnesota Vikings, courtesy of Awesemo.com. After we witnessed the complete collapse of Sam Darnold on Monday, let's keep the momentum going for tonight's Thursday night football game. So right now, please hit that like button and also comment the guy you think is going to break tonight's slate down below. We've got some great options tonight, also some very contrarian options that I'm intrigued by. So give me your thoughts by liking this video and commenting your slate breaker down below. But as always, we waste no time here in the showdown breakdown, so let's kick it off with the quarterbacks and start with Case Keenum in a matchup at Minnesota in which there are 12.5 implied points for Washington. The low total makes Keenum unappealing on paper versus a stout Minnesota defense, but the possibility of Washington trailing and also Terry McLaurin's ability on the outside could give Keenum some sneaky upside at lower ownership than a QB usually sees. Minnesota gets pressure just a 22% rate, and Keenum has a solid 104 QB rating in clean pockets, but Minnesota likely needs to pile up points early given that Keenum has been down to 12 and 25 attempts since Bill Callahan took over as interim head coach. And on the other side, we have Kirk Cousins versus Washington getting 29.5 implied points for Minnesota. Cousins should have a decent floor with his high team total and 27 plus pass attempts over his last 3 weeks, and has upside as a regular play or a captain with some cheap targets due to Adam Thielen's absence. Washington allows a 71% completion rate and a 5.9% passing TD rate with a 64 graded pass rush from PFF, and revenge games aside, it seems like a solid spot to trust Cousins and more of a risky but contrarian GPP move to fade him. Now on to our next group in this showdown breakdown. Let's talk about the running backs with Adrian Peterson in this matchup at Minnesota. Peterson is banged up but expected to play, and he's seen solid value since the Callahan move with 25 and 20 touches in the last 2 weeks at a respectable 4.6 yards per rush. Minnesota allows just 3.8 yards per rush with an 80 run defense grade from PFF, so there is some risk Peterson gets stonewalled or knocked out of the game with Wendell Smallwood lurking as a pivot, who got 5 rushes and 1 target in week 7 with Chris Thompson out. And on the other side, we have Dalvin Cook in this matchup versus Washington. Cook seems like an elite play on the slate with 22.4 touches and 3.1 red zone attempts per game with a solid 3.5 yards after contact and likely more opportunity due to Adam Thielen's absence. Washington's defense is middling with 4.4 yards per rush allowed, and Alex Madison lurks as a cheaper pivot or addition to Cook with just 8 touches per game but 1.7 red zone runs per game. And now let's talk about the receivers in this Thursday night football game and start with Washington's receivers at Minnesota. Terry McLaurin is an interesting and explosive play as long as he avoids the double teams that Minnesota brought last week versus Kenny Golladay, a possibility that would make Paul Richardson on the other side more appealing. Minnesota does allow some passing game opportunity with a 68% completion rate and a 5.2% passing TD rate allowed, so the passing options for Washington may be a bit underowned as a group. It's not good, but they will likely play from behind. And on the other side, we have Minnesota's receivers versus Washington. Stephon Diggs should see more volume with Adam Thielen out after he had 8 targets with 3 targets of 20 plus yards in week 7. While BC Johnson saw 10 slot routes and 25 routes overall after Thielen went out, Kyle Rudolph had 6 targets on 22 routes, and pass-catching tight end Irv Smith saw 20 routes and 6 targets. So a mix of all these guys is logical for showdown builds as pivots or additions to Diggs. And let's close it out with the defenses and the kickers and start with Minnesota's defense versus Washington. Despite his mediocrity, Keenum limits interceptions decently with a 2.3% rate and sacks with a 5.5% rate, so Minnesota seems worth some exposure due to the low total, but not as much as some other defenses recently like the Patriots versus the Jets on Monday. And on the other side, we have a much less appealing Washington defense versus Minnesota. Washington would be a very contrarian option, but they seem unlikely to be able to generate great pressure with a middling 25% pressure rate, and the 67 plays per game they allow are a lot of opportunity for a dynamic Minnesota offense. And then we have the kickers, and Dan Bailey seems like a more interesting option with that team total and a far higher likelihood of Minnesota moving the ball and possibly stalling out in the red zone versus a not awful Washington red zone defense that gives up 4.7 points per red zone visit. Dustin Hopkins doesn't have much appeal with the implied total not offering much of a ceiling, but including him would likely make a lineup far more contrarian. So there you have it. That's what I'm seeing so far for tonight's Thursday night football slate between the Minnesota Vikings and the Washington Redskins. So please hit that like button and comment your slate breaker down below. And if you need some more data, go to Awesemo.com/join and use this promo code SWITCHANDHEDGE for half off your first month of Awesemo Plus. We also have packages as low as $3.95 a week on there, so go check it out right now and find a package that works for you. Go follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Chris Spags. I've got a ton of NFL content every week as well as a lot more NBA content coming out daily, so check out what I'm doing right now on Twitter and Instagram at Chris Spags. I'll be back with you guys on Monday for another showdown breakdown and in just a few hours for another Four Corners video for the NBA, but I appreciate you guys watching. All the support means a ton, so hit that like button before you go, and I wish you guys the best of luck on tonight's slate, so good luck.